The end-of-year office party was always a grand affair. It was one of those events where people let their guard down, where the stiff professionalism of the office gave way to laughter, shared stories, and maybe a few drinks too many. I had debated whether to go this year. Work had been relentless, and all I wanted was a quiet evening at home. But my boss, Mr. Carter, had insisted. "It wouldn't be the same without you, Emma," he'd said with a charming smile. His words carried a weight that left me with little room to decline. So there I was, dressed in my best-fitted black dress that accentuated my curves without being too revealing, my hair swept up into a loose bun. The office was unrecognizable, adorned with twinkling lights, a towering Christmas tree, and the sound of festive music filling the air. As I mingled with my colleagues, I kept catching glimpses of Mr. Carter. He was always surrounded by people, laughing and engaging in animated conversations. He had that magnetic energy that drew everyone in, a natural charisma that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't until much later in the evening that our paths crossed. I was at the refreshment table, pouring myself a glass of wine when I felt his presence beside me. "Enjoying yourself?" he asked, his voice smooth and warm. I turned to face him, startled by how close he was. "It's a lovely party," I replied, hoping my voice didn't betray the flutter of nerves his proximity had caused. His eyes lingered on mine for a moment, and I felt a strange tension in the air. "I'm glad you came," he said, his tone softer now. "I was worried you might skip it this year." I laughed lightly, trying to dispel the awkwardness. "I almost did, but I didn't want to disappoint you." He smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made my stomach flip. "You never do, Emma." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. Before I could respond, someone called his name, and he excused himself, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts. The party began to wind down as the night wore on. People trickled out slowly, their laughter and chatter fading into the quiet hum of the background music. I found myself lingering near the balcony, gazing out at the city lights. I was lost in thought when I heard his voice behind me. "Beautiful view, isn't it?" I turned to see Mr. Carter standing there, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his tie loosened. He looked different, more relaxed, almost vulnerable. "It is," I agreed, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, leaning against the railing beside me. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his tone gentle. "Not at all," I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. For a moment, we stood in silence, the sounds of the city below us filling the void. Then he spoke again, his voice quieter now. "You're one of the reasons I look forward to coming to work, you know." I turned to him, startled by the confession. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. "You don't have to say anything," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "I just wanted you to know." There was something in his gaze that made my breath catch a vulnerability, a longing that I hadn't seen before. It was as if the walls he kept up during work hours had crumbled, leaving him exposed. Before I could respond, he reached out, his fingers brushing against mine. The touch was brief, fleeting, but it sent a jolt through me. "I should go," I said, my voice trembling. He nodded, stepping back. "Of course. Good night, Emma." As I walked away, my heart pounding in my chest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of unease. The memory of our conversation lingered in my mind, the weight of his words pressing down on me. At work, things were different. He was polite, professional, but there was an unspoken understanding between use attention that neither of us acknowledged. A week later, he called me into his office. I hesitated before stepping inside, unsure of what to expect. "Close the door," he said softly, gesturing for me to sit. I obeyed, my heart racing as I took a seat across from him. "I've been thinking about that night," he began, his voice steady. "And I realized I owe you an apology. I crossed a line, and I'm sorry." His honesty caught me off guard. "You don't have to apologize," I said. We were both caught up in the moment. He looked at me, his expression earnest. "Even so, I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. Your presence here means a lot to me, and I don't want anything to jeopardize that." His words brought a sense of relief, but also a pang of disappointment. Part of me had hoped for something more, even though I knew it was impossible. "I appreciate that," I said, offering him a small smile. For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Then he spoke again, his tone lighter now. "Let's get back to work, shall we?" As I left his office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The moment we'd shared was fleeting, but it had opened my eyes to something I hadn't realized before about him, about myself, and about the importance of boundaries. Though the night at the party had changed things between us, it had also brought a sense of clarity. Sometimes the connections we make are meant to teach us something, to help us grow, and for that I was grateful.